going straight to those immigration numbers, a record 111,000 people claimed asylum in the UK in the year ending June 2025. That's up 14% previous years and higher than the 2002 peak of 103,000. We don't have a government minister here today. It doesn't seem like there is a coherent response here.
Well, I mean, first of all, whenever we discuss this, I always say, step back, take the heat out of this. We have to remember we're living in a very perilous, dangerous world at the moment. There is civil war in countries like Sudan. There are people who have to flee the Taliban in Afghanistan. So it's not surprising that asylum applications across Europe will be increasing. But nonetheless, we also know that there are people smuggling gangs who abuse the system. And the government, if there was a government minister on, I suspect they would be pointing out that returns of people who don't have the right to asylum, the returns are up, that they're getting through the big backlog of asylum claims that they inherited from the previous government, and they are beginning to turn this system around. But it's totally understandable.
Well, what proportion of people arriving from boats and in hotels are coming or fleeing actual live war zones who couldn't apply in, for example, this first safe country like France?
Well, in the asylum rules, you don't have to apply in the first country you reach. That's how the international asylum rules work. But you're right. There is a proportion coming from countries where it's not obvious why they need to claim asylum. They're usually coming. They're trying to abuse that system, which is why the government minister, if there was a government minister on, would be pointing out that they've increased the number of returns. But look, I'm not pretending that this system is working. It's clearly broken. And this is the big political challenge for the Labour government. They've got to get a grip of this.
Yeah, I mean, a number of figures came out yesterday. Small boat arrivals, which is the most common type of regular arrival, rose by 38% compared to the previous year. And, you know, this is the one that people are really worried about, isn't it? You can look there at the comparisons, and it seems that, you know, despite promises, that isn't under control yet, is it, Ed?
That's right, and I think the public would be absolutely horrified by these figures. It's a huge amount. It comes on the back of big immigration figures of over 1 million, which was, I think, the last Conservative government figures, and that is now halved because of measures that were taken by the last Conservative government, correcting their errors, if you like. But 111,000 is an unsustainable level. I've talked in the past about how we have to work with our European partners, and some of these return arrangements do work. The number of people coming from Albania dropped dramatically by almost entirely when we had a returns deal with Albania. We've now got one with Iraq. That's the kind of work that needs to be done. And we do have to look at things like the European Convention on Human Rights. You have to look at the kind of treaties that we signed after the Second World War, many countries signed up to, in a world where this kind of mass movement of people wasn't possible. And obviously, after the Second World War, the amount of refugees was huge because Europe had been devastated, as had many other parts of the world.
When you say look at the convention, what do you mean? Just to help us.
Well, you've got to be realistic. You've got to say, for example, you know, how many of these asylum claims that judges are passing are passed on very weak grounds in terms of the right to a family life and so on. You've got to make it, I'm afraid, much, much tougher to make a genuine asylum claim in the UK and get asylum. It's got to be what you and I, the ordinary person in the street, would recognise as somebody genuinely fleeing persecution rather than gaming the system. And for too many people, asylum has become a means of gaining entry into the country they want to live in without a genuine claim that they are fleeing genuine persecution.
I mean, one of the positives to come out of it, the asylum claim backlog was reduced by 25% from the previous year. That's obviously welcome news, and that had been a big issue, hadn't it? The number of people who were just waiting for their claim to be heard, although, you know, then a lot of those go through an appeal process. So still, it's taking too long, isn't it, to process the claims, the appeals, to go through that system.
That was a product of the previous system where essentially they stopped processing people's claims, left people in hotels, and their argument, or the previous Conservative government's argument, was that everyone's going to be put on a flight to Rwanda. Of course, the Rwanda thing never worked. That was the problem. That was that problem with it. It was a sort of gimmick. But they did stop processing these claims, so there was a huge build-up in these hotels across the country. Everyone's very angry about these hotels. I understand why people are angry about it. But I do think it's slightly ironic that you get Conservative politicians, you know, coming on the programme like they were yesterday, banging on about it, when these were the guys who actually opened these hotels. It was their policy to put people in these hotels.
But then do you think at the end of the day, people just get fed up because they look at what's happening and they think, well, hold on a second, the Conservatives couldn't sort it out. Doesn't seem like Labour can sort it out, so what's the answer?
Well, Labour's got to sort it out. It has to. It's got no choice.
But when you look at those numbers, though, they're going up rather than down.
Yeah, they are. But so Labour's got to get better at processing these applications and if people have the right to be here, properly integrating them, and people who don't have the right to be here, who have abused the system, you look at the returns agreements with other countries.
Most people don't mind, do they? I think it's fair to say the British people are welcoming to people who have a legitimate claim for asylum. The worry here is people who are coming, especially on small boats, who are economic migrants, and they get the beneficiary of all of the things that people who have worked hard, who pay their taxes, who are in communities, are now out of reach. Doctors' appointments, schools, all of the pressures on local resources. And so the question is, what's the policy moving forward and who benefits, Ed Vaizey? I mean, I wonder about this. You know, Kemi Badenoch today talking about camps instead of hotels. Do you think that's the policy that we're going to see moving forward?
Well, I don't know whether it would work because we've talked about camps forever and a day, and there's always a talk about, you know, using disused military bases and so on, but it doesn't stop communities railing against that. You think it's a panacea, but you go from an asylum hotel where people are demonstrating outside to saying, well, let's take this old MOD site, and lo and behold, the local villages or towns all say, no, we don't want people in our local MOD site. And I know as a former constituency MP, even if you propose putting housing on former military bases, people get up in arms. But it is one way forward. I don't like this kind of performative way of saying,
we're having a debate on this precise issue.
Let's put everyone in tents and make them suffer. I don't agree with that.
Sorry, why would it be suffering? I mean, we're talking about, for example, potentially putting migrants in, as you say, military bases. There's been experience on offshore boats, etc. The idea is to make it less seemingly attractive than over £170 a night in a hotel that is mostly out of the reach, out of the fingertips of people in their own communities. I wonder, thinking about that as a deterrent from coming here or getting on a boat at all, do you think we're going to be debating this later? It is a good idea.
I think the most effective deterrent is the knowledge that if your application is not genuine, you will be returned to your country of origin.
Absolutely.
That people, at the moment, right, the people come to this country because it's very easy to disappear, for example, into our black economy, because we don't have proper checks in our economy. We don't have things like a digital ID, so people can disappear and they can become, you know, motorbike drivers of fast food, for example, or whatever, or perhaps work in very poor conditions in certain factories and so on. There's been examples of that in Leicester, where I used to be an MP, and there's been abuses in some of the textiles industry there. So first of all, you need to have a system where that if you're not supposed to be here, you will be returned. And equally, you cannot disappear into our black economy, and that people's work terms and conditions will be enforced, and employers cannot exploit the system by taking on people and paying them less than they're supposed to be paid, and so on. So you need proper ID and checks around that as well.
I mean, we still have to wait and see, don't we, what will happen to those migrants who are in the Bell Hotel at the moment. There's only a matter of weeks for the time being where they will then have to be found alternative accommodation. One of the other figures was that the number of asylum seekers currently living in taxpayer-funded hotels has gone up by 8% on last year, 32,059, and that was something that the Labour government had said that they would phase out, wasn't it? Wanted to bring
Yeah, absolutely. In hotels, you know, there are a lot of hotel owners who exploit the system. They know they can charge almost pretty much what they like because of the sort of desperate nature of the crisis that we're facing. I mean, it's costing £5 billion a year, and the public have lost complete patience with this. And if Keir Starmer has to spend £10 billion next year in order to process these asylum claims, in order to have special courts, in order to get these applications dealt with as quickly as possible, then I think, weirdly, the public would support higher spending now in order to make a massive, big
There's a huge
impact.
It takes years for a judiciary to deal with it.
And the point is that, you know, we have an extraordinary situation, and yet at the other end, it's kind of business as usual. Let's have a normal court process and churn through the courts and then appeals and so on and so forth.
Churning through the courts
and
is this issue in Epping, shutting down the hotel. Of course, I'm not entirely sure that people are clear exactly what the legal situation is. There's only what's called an interim injunction at this point. They haven't ruled on whether or not hotels are unlawful.
That's right.
It's just at this point, the court said, you have changed the use of this hotel, and under the Planning Act, you're not allowed to do that. It's possible that they may rule in favour of hotels moving forward. If they don't, there's going to have to be a solution pretty quickly and pretty fast, and the money needs to be there. It doesn't seem like there is. It almost seems to people that it's at the end of our ideas, of our imagination of what to do.
But Ed made this really crucial point, right? People will not be happy wherever these people end up going. So if you put them in a camp, if you happen to live near the camp, everyone will be angry. If you put them in a sort of, old disused base or, old perhaps student halls of residence, all the people who live there will be angry. I mean, people that are angry will be, this is going to be an issue. It's going to follow these groups of people around, and that is the problem. And in the end, we've got to be realistic. Whether we like it or not, we have responsibilities and duties under the law, under the international conventions we've signed up to treat people humanely. So that means if people arrive on our shores to claim asylum, they have to be accommodated somewhere. And the best way to deal with this is to process their applications quickly and to remove people who are not supposed to be here and people who do have the right to be here to properly integrate them in society.
OK, well, we are debating later, aren't we, whether asylum seekers should be placed in communities or in compounds, so get in touch with your thoughts. We must talk about the situation with Israel and Gaza because, there's lots of developments this morning, isn't there? Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met military officials to approve plans for the takeover of Gaza City. There are also claims that restarting of the ceasefire talks. But meanwhile, in the papers today, on the front page of The Guardian, it's been revealed 83% of Gaza war dead are civilians. That's the suggestion from this Israeli data that has come out. And also, on the front page of The Telegraph, famine formally declared in Gaza City with catastrophic conditions there. I mean, it just seems like, this whole situation is just so mired in difficulty, isn't it, as to what the way forward will be, and meanwhile, what's happening in Gaza City to those people? Well,
it is catastrophic. I mean, it's devastating. The loss of life in Gaza is devastating. The initial attacks on October the 7th were heinous and devastating, and hostages, again, all hostages must be released unconditionally. And I understand there's possibly another ceasefire negotiation going on to try and get hostages released. But equally at the same time, you've got these very extreme figures in the Israeli government who are effectively talking about erasing Palestine as a potential state ever. I mean, lawyers will debate till kingdom come, sort of genocide and so on, but that is genocidal intent as far as I can see as a layman. I mean, I'll leave it to lawyers to decide on the official definition. In the end, the only way through has got to be to bring hope back to the prospect of what we call a two-state solution, a viable Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel. If we cannot get there, if the world cannot get there, then I just think that is an immense tragedy. And that, in the end, is why I think Keir Starmer's talked about recognising a Palestinian state. I hope he does. I think that's the right thing to do. But the international community have got to do all they can to bring about peace and bring about that two-state solution.
How does recognition of a Palestinian state help the civilians in Gaza, Ed Vaizey, would you say?
Well, people say that now is the wrong time to recognise a Palestinian state because there's no clear borders for what a Palestinian state would be. There's no clear government of who would run a Palestinian sate. Look, I've always been a strong supporter of Israel and always will be, and Israel is really the only democracy in the Middle East. And it's worth reminding people that the horrific situation in Gaza is causing huge consternation in Israel itself. People are on the streets demonstrating against Netanyahu's policies. And there are many people in Israel who feel that Netanyahu's gone too far in Gaza, has completely undermined the support that Israel received after the October the 7th attacks. Now, and there is an argument that what Netanyahu's doing, given how controversial a politician he is partly about him staying in power and partly a government driven by quite extreme elements in Israeli society. And, it is a situation of great despair because we may get a ceasefire, and it may be that the prospect of going into Gaza City generates that ceasefire. We want the hostages back. Jonathan is absolutely right. But we've got to look to the future. How on earth are these two communities going to live together in the future after what has happened on October the 7th and after what has happened in Gaza? It's almost impossible to see a way through to a lasting peace, given what has happened in the last few years.
Going into Gaza City, if that leak, which appears, it's on the front page of The Guardian, to come from the Israeli Defence Department itself, if that's the casualty rate that they're talking about, and it is civilians, how can that conceivably be justified in any kind of, not just international law, but even Israeli domestic law? Help anybody understand that?
Well, the Israeli government would argue, as you well know, that Hamas is embedded within the civilian population, that you're fighting an urban war here where, in order to get to Hamas, you know, they are hiding behind civilians. They store their weapons in hospitals and they base their headquarters in hospitals. And so that would be the argument. The argument would be that Hamas is holed up in Gaza City, and the only way to bring Hamas to the table to get a potential ceasefire and to get the hostages released is to threaten that you're going to go into the last part of Gaza that Israel hasn't yet been. We'll see whether that can be held off. And you're quite right, Rob, that the trouble with what is the devastation that is happening in Gaza is that thousands of civilians are being killed as a consequence.
On a continuing basis. OK, well, listen, something else we've got to talk about is facial recognition, because the Met Police are going to be using live facial recognition at this weekend's Notting Hill Carnival. It's a major expansion of the technology there. And 2 million people are expected at the festival. They're going to have cameras at every point. The Met Police are saying that it is vital to catch dangerous offenders, but the Equalities Watchdog have called it chilling. They say it's a breach of human rights. Joining us now is former Met Police officer Leroy Logan. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. What are your concerns, then, about the use of this technology?
Well, I have concerns about over-reliance on technology, especially when that system gives false positives for people of colour and women. And we've seen that it gives... people have already started to take complaints or make complaints at police because of that. And also, it's overlaying a very flawed intelligence system because of the subjective, unverified information that goes into the intelligence system. So that in itself creates false positives. And an example of that is the automatic number plate recognition system. You get people who've got markers on their vehicles, and unfortunately, they're always getting stopped, even though there's no real verified intelligence. It's just information that's been put on there, hasn't been verified, and that's a result of a lack of intelligence officers and intelligence units to verify these things because of austerity. So, you know, there's unfortunately a lot of things that
Leroy, it may be imperfect, and certainly I and many people understand the concerns about civil liberties. But the Met say that this year there's only been 8 false alerts in total out of millions of people scanned. As you'll be aware, the Court of Appeal about 5 years ago said although there's no legislation about this, it is a lawful tool to use in fighting crime, and none of the people scanned have resulted in wrongful arrest. Doesn't it seem that the system is actually quite accurate? In other words, it keeps people safe. I'll give you another example. Last year at the Carnival, as you know, 8 people were stabbed, including, tragically, Cher Maximum, a mum who died protecting her 3-year-old child. I mean, if this tech could protect one person and prevent one tragedy like that, why is it a bad thing to use?
No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think there's an over-reliance on it. And what happens if someone's got a face mask? That's not going to pick up anything. And as I said, they're prone to false positives, and it creates tension. If someone doesn't want to, you know, maybe the officer just totally reliant on the cameras and it being registered, and that person doesn't answer questions. And in a large crowd, again, that just creates tension, and it can go on to be quite a violent situation. So in a lot of ways, it can be seen as an obstacle and not an assistance for policing to keep a safe and secure carnival, whether it's in small areas or the wider footprint of the carnival route.
Leroy, just to be clear, the people that this technology looks for are already on a database. So those are people with previous convictions. Often they're people who are already on police bail. These are not you and me or ordinary people. It's not like the state of China, right, where you get recognised and they somehow work out through your passport or something else who you are. These are people who are already people of concern showing up who might be causing trouble. And just to give you an idea of it, since January 2024, facial recognition has led to 1,180 arrests, 890 charges or cautions. And here's a critical thing. That includes sex offenders and violent robbers. Now, isn't that yet again example of how this technology works? It identifies the people who are most likely to cause the type of trouble that you don't want to see at places like the Notting Hill Carnival.
I'm not saying that the technology can't assist officers, especially when you've got a large crowd situation and highlighting it. It's just a question of, is it going to really assist those officers and speak to those people? It's a large crowd setting. I can see it being useful in a steady stream of people on a road or a highway or whatever it may be.
Yep.
The issue is, in a large crowd situation, and you identify them, how many officers you're going to need to go in to identify that person.
Well,
I would prefer
Yeah.
them being followed afterwards and being spoken to then and there. That's my concern. It's
Leroy,
about not just the information, but it's how it's being used.
Sure. I think as well, Leroy, you make the critical point, which we'll be speaking to the Met about, the number of false positives, especially of people of colour, where it often got it wrong in the past. In America, they've stopped using it in places, certainly in New Zealand, where they trialled this as well. And if you collar the wrong person, that's precisely the type of tension that's going to inflame things. And it'd be, to say the least, pretty unpleasant if you are the unhappy beneficiary of a wrongful arrest. Now, I wonder, it's all very easy for us to talk about.
And also, if they have a face mask.
Sure, it does work.
If they wear a face mask, it does work.
Thank you so much, Leroy, for being here this morning. Yeah, listen, I'm not a person of colour. I just sort of wonder, I'm going to ask you, Sean, in that sense in which you can imagine yourself finding yourself in Notting Hill Carnival and being tapped on the shoulder, having been falsely identified as somebody who presents a social danger. In circumstances where you, like the vast, overwhelming majority of people who attend that event, are law-abiding citizens, what does that do to you if that happened?
Well, it's exactly that. It's the tensions, it's the feeling that you know that you could be spotted, you're more likely to be spotted when you're completely innocent. And the fact that I might go to Notting Hill Carnival and I might be pulled over, I mean, that's horrific. And I don't think that's a price worth paying. However, I do see all the other arguments. You're saying these are people who are on a list or who are wanted or who are of interest.
Yeah.
And most people want to be kept safe, and these are, they're doing bad things. So I get that argument, but the fact that you could be stopping wrong people and ruining community relations, I just don't think that's a price worth paying.
It's just that thing, isn't it, that people worry about, though, that, cameras are there watching our every moves, but actually when it does lead to people being arrested that would be a danger otherwise, is it a price worth paying?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how sophisticated this technology is. I mean, if it's clear that it creates lots of these false identifications, then it obviously shouldn't be used. But if that's in a very, very, very...
There were a number of false alerts, but none of them had led to false arrests from the information we've got so far. But we will be speaking to the Met Police about this in the next hour.
I mean, I genuinely believe that using technology is a good thing to tackle crime. I mean, we've always had these debates. I remember, 20 years ago, we were having debates about CCTV cameras. But, look, I think it all comes down to whether the quality of this tech, if it is effective, then we should use it. If it creates all of these false identifications, then no.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. I mean, we are the most surveyed society probably in Western Europe in terms of CCTV, and Jonathan is absolutely right. We've had vigorous debates about it, but at the end of the day, you watch any police procedural drama and the first thing they do after a crime is let's get the CCTV. And there's no doubt at all that CCTV helps solve crimes. There's no doubt at all that facial recognition technology is biased and it generates far too many false positives for people of colour. But there's also no doubt that facial recognition technology will become part of the sort of crime prevention strategy. It will be a technology that is used. It's good that we debate it. There is a regulator for it as well. It's good that the police had to put up signs.
But no statute. We're going to be putting this to Lindsay Chiswick from the Met Police. It'll be very interesting to see what they have to say.